Okay, welcome everyone to another Ask Professionals. We've got a very interesting topic today about accessibility news and some of the people out there that gather all that news for us. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting here today in Canberra, and pay respects to the elders, both past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And please feel free to put in the chat where you pay your respects to today, where you're from. And if you want to ask questions throughout the session, please put them in the chat and we will send them through to Amanda to moderate. We have a couple to get us started, but yes, always love to have your questions as well. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Bree Norton. I'm the co-chair with Amanda of OZeWAI, National Australian Professional Organisation for Accessibility Specialists. We are coming up to our renewal time. So anyone who joins now, this is for the next annual financial year, please jump on and if you haven't already, join or renew your membership. It's all coming up for renewal now, and that helps us run all the benefits that we are running for people in Australia and the Asia Pacific. Just a couple of things that are coming up. We've got some great news with a couple more sessions in August and September, so July and August coming up. So we've got one on a deep dive into for developers and a deep dive for designers. And also this week, keep your ear out. We're going to be sharing on our socials an info session with OZeWAI, our mentor partnership, and information for that. And then there'll be a specific session for anyone who is an OZeWAI member in a couple of weeks' time as well. So keep an eye out for those. I might pass it over to you, Amanda, and get us going for today.
Thanks so much, Bree,
Thanks.
and thanks to everyone for joining. So my name's Amanda Mace. I'm your moderator today. My day job is vice president of a digital accessibility firm called Grackle Docs, head office in Canada with an Australian office and a UK office as well. I head up our UK office, or our UK office, our Australian office. I'm okay. It's fine. It's early here. It's only 10 a.m. in Perth. I am Perth based. I can see you laughing, Ricky. Stop. I am Perth-based and clearly need more coffee than I've already had this morning. And I am quite privileged to once again be moderating this panel, and what an interesting panel too. So I will let each of our guests introduce themselves. So why don't I start with the fellow Australian, now that I know where I am. Ricky, how about you do a very quick introduction?
I'm Ricky Onsman. I don't run the UK office either, but I have renewed my OZeWAI membership. I'm principal technical writer for a US company called Vispero that undertakes digital accessibility consultancy and runs the JAWS screen reader software, etc. I've been a member of OZeWAI for 14 or 15 years. I've been on the committee for about 10. I've been on far too many of these Ask the Professional sessions. I don't know why they keep asking me back. But I do produce a weekly newsletter, and I also produce a monthly newsletter for OZeWAI. So that's me.
Awesome. Jack, would you like to go next?
Certainly. And it's great to meet everybody, see everybody here, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Jack McElhaney, as my note says in the chat box, originally from Boston, Massachusetts. Anybody who's been to Boston will know that painting behind me is the Back Bay of Boston, where I used to work. I worked many years for Thomson Reuters. So Amanda, Thomson was a Canadian company, which is now a U.S. London company. I've worked many years in compliance and regulatory, and I now work for Microsist, and I have been doing my newsletter, Accessibility in the News, for the last 10 years. And it's an international newsletter, and I've had the ability to connect with an awful lot of people, as is tonight, talking about news and sharing information that I think is important to the accessibility world and the disability world.
And yeah, extra thanks, Jack, and David as well for joining us in your evenings. We really do appreciate that. So, David, would you like to do just a really quick intro?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Dave Kennedy. Everyone calls me DK. I am a UX lead, user experience lead by way of my day job. I work for a company called Ad Hoc, which is a United States government contractor. We work on a lot of what I would call government modernization type work, where we take really old systems and rebuild them to make them better for US citizens. Um, and yeah, I run a little newsletter called Accessibility Weekly. Like Jack, it recently hit its 10-year anniversary last year. It is a labor of love and something that it brightens my week usually when I'm sitting down to put it together. So yeah, really excited to be here and share some expertise and learn from you all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. DK, I like that. I may have to pull that out once or twice this session. So, um, there's so much to talk about here. And initially, actually, when we came up with this topic, I was like, well, what we talk about? The news is the news. But the more I thought about how news is getting brought to our attention and the different methods in which we do that, newsletters, social media, that sort of thing, the more I thought this could actually be a very interesting session. So, Dave, I think even though you were the last one to talk, I'm going to give you the first opportunity. I'm really interested. So you said you've just hit 10 years. Are you finding that the way that you best communicate with the community to bring all of this accessibility news is still your newsletter, or have you found that you've had to branch into those other modes of communication?
Yeah, I have always stayed focused on the newsletter. It is, I don't know about the other folks here, but it takes me, a number of hours a week to put that thing together. So I do not have time to branch out into other avenues of communication. Um, I will say as the landscape has changed, for me anyway, I think the things that I have seen change the most have been in the past, like few years, there's obviously been a bit of a move away from social media for a lot of things. And I, probably some of that was uh, self-inflicted on my own because one of the primary ways I used to find and curate things was through Twitter because it was a very active, had an active disability community. There was lots of web designers and developers there, and now that has fractured, right? Like people are in different little corners of the web, and so it is challenging to find find those new voices and those just interesting articles that you're like, oh, that's from someone I haven't read before. That's interesting. Um, and the other big thing I think for me, um, which is veering off maybe of your question, but it's obviously the big elephant in the room, which is AI. Um, I get more pitches from folks with AI products, AI infused things, AI written articles. So you really have to be more on your toes about the type of information you're putting out because my number one goal is to put things in front of people that is well thought out and vetted and correct. Because I started the newsletter because I still remember diving into this field and like running into situations where, you find like people saying like two or three different things and you're like, which one is right? And it was really confusing. So I want to cut through that for some folks. So yeah, those are big challenges. And that's, I think, why it's been enough to focus on those. And I don't feel the need to focus on any other avenues of communication.
Oh, you just gave me so much material right then and there. Um, But Dave, one of the points that you made was sort of the purpose, why you started, which is a really interesting one and one that I think is actually becoming more and more difficult to find reliable information. Jack, I'm curious, more than a decade doing news, what's the purpose now? What was the purpose in the beginning? Has it changed, and what's the purpose now?
Well, the initial purpose 10 years ago was, I was new to the industry. And, as I kind of took a look at the industry and what was being published at the time, I didn't see a lot of what I would consider newsletters, and that was really coming from my years at Thomson. So Thomson, at that time, when I worked for them, it was truly a print-based business, so newsletters and journals and books and case-bound, and then eventually evolved to online. And so I didn't see a lot of information, I thought, in the industry back then that um, was telling me a lot. So I really started to research, one by one. And then what was big 10 years ago is Title III of the ADA as far as lawsuits. And so because I worked in compliance and regulatory for so long, I gravitated toward lawsuits because there was a plethora of information on it, and bloggers were blogging on it, law firms were writing about it, and there was just a huge amount of Title III lawsuits. And so, interesting enough, I just really started to share it with people in the industry that I had met over time, and I knew I had something that I never knew I was going to have. As people would contact me and say, "Can I sign up for your newsletter?" And it's like, I didn't know I had a newsletter. I was just kind of sending stuff out to people, and then it just kind of morphed and morphed and morphed, and then the newsletter itself morphed as more and more people started to sign up from around the world in all different categories of job title and types of companies. So it wasn't just lawyers like it was at the beginning. It was accessibility people. It was colleges and universities, which is probably it's at least a third, if not more, of my subscriber base. And so I was initially just national news, and then it became international news because disabilities isn't just a U.S. thing, and accessibility isn't just a U.S. thing. And the blog section, there used to be one blog section. Well, that started to get extremely robust, and so I started to break it out into federal news and colleges and university news, and a variety of different news sections. And then I got into conferences, I got into training, I got into accessibility statements. It really started to expand based on the news of the day. And I look at news, and this is across all sectors of news, not just our industry. News is like a rapidly flowing river. And if you're not paying attention during the course of some time of the day, you miss something. It just flows right by you. And so, David touched on it, social media. I noticed the shift when Twitter became X, and there was a major rush to get out of Twitter and get out of X, and a lot of that shifted over to LinkedIn. So I'm an active poster on LinkedIn, and we still post regularly on X and Blue Sky and Threads and stuff like that. But LinkedIn really has changed. The people
Yep.
really do post a lot there, and they have a chance to share information with the community. And a prime example was I was in Kauai for a couple of weeks, and I was talking to some friends last week, and they said, "Hey, I thought you were taking vacation. You were posting on LinkedIn." Well, the news doesn't take a break. And I think it's important as a community we stay abreast of what's going on around the world. That way, we can have a stronger impact on what we are doing as professionals and what we need to know. And it's not just legal, and it's not just technical, and certainly AI is getting an awful lot of focus. But I think the biggest focus for AI, again, wraps into my regulatory stuff, is the number of lawsuits that are happening already. Workday is the current one that everybody's focusing on, but the number of lawsuits that will
Oh,
happen
good.
related to
Workday's awesome.
discrimination as it relates to AI and people who are disabled.
Ricky, same or similar question for you. Your motivation around sharing accessibility news, because you do this as part of your role, and then of course as part of the your volunteer role at OZeWAI as well. So what's your motivation and has that moved over time?
It certainly has. I mean, it's relevant to say that I was worked in information services before I ever worked in web tech. So I was writing a lot before I ever got involved with the web. Um, and that involved writing for different outlets. So I was doing events listings for newspaper, radio, TV, learning to write in different styles to suit different clients. So I've always been a writer and an editor. When I became a web designer, a freelance web designer, I thought I wanted to create a community among my clients. So I started doing a monthly newsletter for my clients, telling them what each other was doing, that kind of stuff. And that worked really, really well. Since then, in almost every job I've had, I've done a newsletter of some sort. Um, until I reached TPGI, which is now part of Vispero. And I wasn't doing anything but technical writing there, writing training courses, writing technical articles for accessibility engineers, that kind of thing. And our chief accessibility officer said, I wish there was some way I could keep up with everything that's happening in the industry. And I said, well, I can do you a rundown on a weekly basis, just news items that would be of interest to you, including like what our competitors are doing, that kind of stuff. Um, that quickly got into 50 or 60 items a week just by subscribing to RSS feeds and subscribing to, and on feeds, I have about 500 feeds in my RSS feeder. And I subscribe to about 150 email newsletters from people who don't have RSS feeds. But it's a very quick process. My newsletter is just a title, a link, and a one-line description. Click through if you want to read more. And our CAO said, this is really good. We should actually share this with all our staff. So I started disseminating it via Teams to our staff members. And they said, actually, our clients would really like this as well. So I go, okay, fine. So let's just make it public. And so anyone can pretty much sign up for it. And I also put it as a blog post on our website so that people can use RSS to be notified when a new edition is published, and they get it that way. And it really is purpose specific. I don't include a lot of things that are beyond just articles, news, press releases, articles about technical developments, that kind of stuff. I don't run webinars, I don't run events, and I keep it really limited to what I call news items. They're not all focused on digital accessibility. It's more like they're focused on what I think people in digital accessibility should know about. So quite a few of them are technical articles written by designers and developers that have an impact of some sort on digital accessibility. And that makes for a pretty good mix. And a lot of people pick it up on social media and share it via social media. I find, like Jack, that LinkedIn has replaced Twitter in a lot of ways. A lot of articles themselves are being published on LinkedIn. I include some of those in my reading list, but I'm also aware that not everybody is on LinkedIn. So my preference goes to people who write blog posts on their own blogs or on their company blogs. And it's a good balance of opinion from people who have something to say, technical news sharing of what different companies are up to. Somebody's made a new deal with a European company that they're going to share, that kind of stuff. And it gives you a good perspective of things that are happening in the digital accessibility industry. So in one sense, it's quite tightly focused. But on the other hand, it's not nearly as curated as DK's newsletter. I just include pretty much anything that I think is newsworthy.
Yeah, so that's really interesting to hear the sort of different approaches. Because DK, you did mention that you do quite a bit of vetting and ensuring that sort of fits in sort of the framework that you want it. I guess I'm curious. I'll start with you, DK, about that vetting process. So we do have an awful lot of opinion pieces going out, not just technical. How do you have a checklist? How are you vetting those?
Yeah, that is a good question. So the first line of defense is they're on the newsletter site. It's a11yweekly.com/good-links. And that is my first line of defense. That's kind of like what I look for when, people send me stuff or I find stuff. And that has little rules in it like, yeah, like if you put something behind an email sign up form, not gonna put it in there. That's cool. I know a lot of companies use that tactic to build their email list, but I want to find stuff that people can get at and learn from. It has rules in there like I'm probably not going to run press releases. If you have a product, I gotta get a lot of products like, hey, like, can you put my thing that I built in your newsletter? And I'm like, cool. I can't, like, if I put that in front of people, what happens is that if it has accessibility problems, people will email me and be like, hey, this has problems. This is bad. And I'm like, well, I can't check everything. So what I've started to do is I'll say to folks that they're like, hey, that seems really cool. Thanks for building that. Now, I'm not going to put your thing in, but if you write a blog post about how you created it, the choices you made, if you teach something, then come back to me and we'll figure out if it's a good fit. Because ultimately, Accessibility Weekly is a teaching tool. And so that page is the first line of defense, and then from there, it's really, and I'm I think Jack and Ricky probably have the same. It's really like a feel. It's like it's you're when you sign up for someone's newsletter, you're signing up for like their what they're interested in. Like you will find so many blog posts about focus styles because like I'm like obsessed with focus styles. You'll find so many things on design systems and HTML semantics because those are the things that in my own career I've like run into and I'm like, well, this is a problem. Like this comes up constantly, right? So I'm like basically saying, hey everyone, please pay attention to this. This is important. But I think like, Jack and Ricky, they cover things in it from a different angle and a different point of view. And I think that's valuable too. Like I don't cover as much of the legal landscape. Um, I don't cover as much of I think as the sort of weekly news stuff as Ricky and Jack do. And the other thing for me is I tightly curated 10 to 15 links. That's it. Like
Right.
then we're done because people don't have a ton of time and I'm trying to like if I have a few links in there that they click on, I've done my job. So
So it's interesting that it's sort of very different approaches. And I think you're right, Dave, that in every newsletter you bring a bit of yourself, right? How can you not? Jack, when you're looking at what to include, what not to include, I'm particularly curious around the fact that, so I know, and like my company's one that does it, we have a blog. All of the companies, big and small and medium, all have blogs and they're posting all the time, just, weekly, daily sometimes, various things. Do you find that it's saturated because companies are now kind of getting in that? It's not just people, it's companies are getting in that space of writing blog posts and sort of producing that news.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise that is out on the internet. And I think, David and Ricky and I and all the other newsletters, we have a responsibility to our subscribers. And I think that's what is my focus. Subscribers are king when it comes to me. The other thing that I have is content. It's the three C's. It's content, it's consistency, and then it's community. And so the community I've built over the course of 10 years, when someone signs up on my newsletter, I don't accept everybody as a subscriber. And so what I try to do is get an understanding of who they are. So when they subscribe, I do a little research on them. I want to have an understanding of what they could possibly be interested in over the course of a week. And then I kind of have that radar going in front of me every Thursday night when I'm doing it. And that way I have a better idea of when I'm making the selection on that consistent content that I like to post, I'm thinking of that kind of that global base of people. And that way, I think that keeps me honest when I'm doing the curation. Uh, unlike David, I go the opposite direction. I have more than 15, and in that weeks it's multiples of 4 or 5 or 6. Because I look at it as the subscriber base is so big, and they're from all these different countries that I don't know. You know, the people in the United States might be not interested in this link, but you know what? The people in the UK definitely will be, and the people in Australia definitely will be, and the people in South Africa. And so I'm real careful about what I put in, and you know, so it has to meet my sniff test of the 3 C's, and then my understanding of who the subscribers are. And people will send me things that they want me to post, similar to David. I'm sure Ricky too is. Um, you know, if the product looks like it's been vetted by the industry and it's the press release on it that sounds like it's legitimate, I'll take a look at it myself and I'll post it. But you know, like blogs, I have people who have sent me blogs and it's like that's not a blog, that's just stream of conscious and really doesn't have anything to do with what we do every day. And so that's really what I'm trying to do is save subscribers time so they don't have to go out and look at this information themselves. It's all in one-stop shopping newsletter every week, and that they can consistently know that I'm going to be covering topics that are of interest to them.
It seems with all three of you that it's a real it's quite an effort. Like it's a personal, not only are you vetting and curating these newsletters, it's quite personal. Jack, I was really interested to hear that you don't accept everyone on your subscriber list, which is super fascinating to me. How long does it take you to put together your list? So I know, DK, you mentioned several hours. Jack, for you?
Well, I took a journalism course at the University of Texas, and one of the exercises they did for all the students is you had to, during the course of your weeks, because I think it was a 9 week course, you had to calculate out how long it took you to do it every week. And the number I came up with was 22 hours a week. And that's on top of my full-time job. And so that, it is quite an effort. It's quite a lift. And everybody that knows me knows that Thursday night is not a night for you to book tickets for me to see a concert here in Austin, Texas, or to out to dinner. I am head down and I'm doing the newsletter and I'm listening to music. And a lot of people know that I have a playlist at the top, and that's what I'm listening to when I'm doing the newsletter.
I mean, it's a part-time job in itself.
It is,
Ricky,
yeah.
you mentioned it doesn't take you as long. Um, Reason slash trick to cutting some of that time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I include about 50 to 60 items every week. And that takes me I send it out on a Monday night. Now, I'm in the situation where my Mondays are pretty free because I work for an American company and it's their Sunday still. So I don't get bothered by work stuff too much. But what I tend to do is I spend about an hour to an hour and a half on Sunday doing the first run through of my feed reader and email newsletter links. And then I'll come back to it at about 10 o'clock on a Monday night, fill in anything that hasn't already been there, and then I send it out at about 11 p.m. on a Monday night. So it's about 2.5 hours all up. It's also not part of my job at all to do this. So I have to fit it in around the other work that I do, which is fine. But that's what makes it a Sunday and a Monday job because they're quiet days. Significantly also, I avoid duplication. So if there's a French court case that has been dismissed and suddenly 16 people are writing articles about this one French court case, well, I'll go as close as I can to the source material and use that link, but I won't necessarily put in everybody's opinion on it or everybody's blog post about it. So in that sense, I mean, I curate it to that extent. But for the rest of it, I basically follow the links on my feed reader. I give the article a quick scan. I look at it and decide whether it's useful or not. By Monday evening, I've also had Jack's newsletter. I've had DK's newsletter, Laura Carlson's, Eric Bailey's, and I go through those, see if they have anything in there that I should have. So I shamelessly steal from them, and then I send it out.
So that's a great
Well,
question for Jack and DK. Are you subscribed to each other and to Ricky?
I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of Ricky stuff on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and David, I don't know. Do you subscribe to mine? I don't think I subscribe to yours.
I subscribe to both y'all's, and I shamelessly steal. Like I said, it's they catch stuff that I don't, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I love Jax because like he covers the news like really in depth across multiple different ways, and I don't go that deep, but there's usually like an article or two in there that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Um, I always like speaking to curation, there's another thing I always try to do, and it relates to the sort of shamelessly stealing, but it's I try to do I try to find an article at least one a week where it shares a perspective of someone with a disability. Um, I think there's other publications that do a better job at that, but I'm always trying to bring that perspective to my readers. The other thing I try to do is throw a curveball, to use an American baseball metaphor. Um, like I will try to put an article or two in there that is maybe not like pure accessibility, but it's like close, or it's like, hey, there's this larger thing happening in tech that you should pay attention to. Um, and I'm always really mindful. I've actually gotten criticism before around like featuring the same authors before. So I really try to be mindful of that. And that goes to like my earlier point about how it's harder to discover new voices,
Mm.
because that takes time. Um, and it's harder in this sort of complex information ecosystem. But it is important to me. I try really hard to do it, but it's challenging because you I think you fall back on the same authors because you know that they consistently produce content that is good, and that's what you want to deliver for your audience. But you also don't want your audience to feel like, especially if they're accessibility professionals, to feel like I'll never get my stuff featured in there. I want
Mm.
people to feel like they can email me and they might have a shot. Also, if you've ever emailed me, like I may not reply because I get a lot of emails, but rest assured, I read them all. It's like I said, it's a like the others I've indicated, it's a labor of love, and I have to cut it off each week at some point.
When it comes to, because similar to, there's lots of companies who are, mass producing blog posts and articles and things like that. Um, and there's this incredible array of content. Do you do you find yourself, and DK, I'll start with you, but I'm curious from all three of you, sort of going, this is too basic for my reader list. My reader list is, they want more technical, or do you want to have that array of basic right through to for the accessibility professionals. So we have like sitting in this room today, we've got an array of people who are still very much learning or have just really discovered accessibility and are learning the basics. And then we've got people who've been in the industry for, 2 decades and are constantly looking for something to feed them because it is harder. I've discovered this myself, the longer I've been in the industry, the harder it is to feed me because you're looking for new things that you don't already know. I don't need someone to explain alt text to me one more time. I've got that. I'm good. 13 years in, I better have that. But I guess that's um, sort of an interesting part because you all do very different types of newsletters. But I'm curious about the audience that you're looking to appeal to because the spectrum in accessibility is actually quite broad from UXers who've just discovered because someone said around a table in a meeting somewhere, is this accessible, to professionals who are looking to be fed.
Yeah, that is a great question. I try to approach that through the different sections in my newsletter. So the featured article is usually, I want that article to be more in depth, really meaty, maybe a bit of a hot take. Something that's people are gonna read it and walk away and really think about it. They're gonna have to chew on it. Um, and then the links in the middle are a grab bag. Like hopefully there's something in there for like the beginner, something for the seasoned professional. Um, and then I have a new to accessibility section, which that is squarely focused on the beginner. I have again gotten like good criticism that like, oh my gosh, if I read another article about alt text, like please no. But I include the same topic over and over because my viewpoint is one, often it's different people writing those and they're going to say things differently, they're going to approach things differently, and it might trigger something in someone because it's said a different way. And also I want to try to feature different voices. That's how I approach it, but it's always a challenge, like to think about like what is too complex and not complex enough. And I try to, you know, approach that with a mix.
That's fair. Jack, do you do the same? Try to find a mix and a balance of the technical and the new too?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have a section that's products and then announcements. So yeah, I try to cover a lot of information in there, and then the blog section. I'm similar to David, and I'm always trying to find new voices. People in the industry, the go-to bloggers within the industry, and they like the blogging. Sherry Byrne, I love her stuff. I could read her stuff all day because she gives a technical slant and a legal slant, and if there's a legal slant, I'm always going to read it. But like I try to share a lot of the legal information during the course of a week with the different attorneys in the industry because I know they're real busy, and they might not have the same news feeds that I have, because I came from the world of Thompson West and Westlaw and LexisNexis and Bloomberg Law and you name it. I was in that orbit for a long time, and I still am. So I'll feed information that I think would be important to Lainey Feingold to read, or Christina Lonnie to read, or Ken Nakata to read, or whoever, just so if they missed it, then at least I got them covered on that. But as far as new things, well, there's new things in law. Obviously, this year, Section 504 and Title II was a big disappointment for all of us, and the coverage of that certainly was important. And then on the technical side, so much of what I'm seeing is AI related, and then it's really a question of, is that really going to help us or hurt us? And
Mm.
how do you sort through that? Because no one really has the full answer at this point in time. I mean, I saw an article today that Ford, um, they rehired about 200 of their testing. I think they're calling testing engineers because they had outsourced it to AI, and AI wasn't doing the testing as good as the humans, so they hired them back. And so that's important in our field to have an understanding of how's AI being used. Is there a testing tool, whether it be for documents, whether it be for websites or mobile, that is effective and is saving time and money and is going to revolutionize the industry? And the answer is no at this point. But I think it's important us as people who are reporting on it that we're staying abreast of it. And the reason it takes me 22 hours, I don't just scan the articles, I read them. Because I want to know, we're a consulting firm where I work, Microsoft, and I have a lot of clients, and I have to advise them on what they should do. And if I'm not up to speed on what's going on in the industry, and I mean like really up to speed, I'm not a good consultant. And so from that perspective, I have to stay abreast of really deep diving into topics and give them the best the information that I can possibly give them that has been vetted through my reading more than anything.
No, I very, very much appreciate that, and how important it is when you're giving content out. As someone who, when our company does blog posts, anything WCAG related, I'm like, just let me read it first, just before it goes out, just to make sure that I'm happy with all the things that we're saying on there. Ricky, because you do technical writing, and I know how great your technical writing is, do you find yourself ever leaning towards those more technical articles?
Oh, for sure. If I come across technical articles, I'll definitely give them priority. And to the question that you put to both Jack and DK, my audience is our Chief Accessibility Officer. He's my rule of thumb. Would he be interested in reading this? That doesn't mean that he's going to read every single article about alt text that's put out there, but he is quite likely to be interested in somebody's take on alt text. And I will include articles that are not necessarily very good about alt text. I've read the article and I go, I think that David should read this because it's a load of rubbish. So I will include it for that purpose. And that works for him and it works for other people, you know. There's sometimes I publish links to articles that have blatant mistakes in them, but it's interesting to see those mistakes. And that gives my Chief Accessibility Officer a perspective on what people are saying in the industry, what they're doing. Significantly, I also subscribe and use RSS to follow other news aggregators that are web tech related, front end focus, front masters, that kind of stuff. 9 out of the 10 of the articles they are not digital accessibility related. But when they do include one, it's going to be a good one because it's past their curation and editorial standards. And that's where I get my new voices from people who are not listed in the typical digital accessibility sources, but they get listed in general web tech sources or even general news. Sometimes Forbes will come out with an article written by somebody who really gets digital accessibility and puts it in the context of general news. That's something that I think our CAO will be interested to read, that Forbes is covering this issue at all, that Time is covering an issue. That itself is news.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Ricky, I'm going to stick with you for a minute because I'm really curious about, like, you all sound like you have kind of your go-tos. You want news, you know, you kind of know where you're going to find it. When you're looking for a new voice, you haven't filled out your list this week, you're looking for a new voice, or maybe there's something in the news that you just haven't found a good enough article to cover it. Where do you search? How do you find that thing?
Well, for my RSS reader, I have it organized into categories and they are things like people who write about accessibility, people who have disabilities who write, people who work in companies that focus on digital accessibility, that kind of stuff. And I'm constantly adding to those sources. So when I come across somebody in, say, Front End Focus, an article, I'll go to that article, and then that guy writes a lot about digital accessibility, as it turns out. So I'll add him to my feed. And that way I build up more and more and more. I very rarely discard anyone, but it's also significant that not everybody writes every week. Even people who write regularly about digital accessibility, some of them might only write once a month, once every 6 weeks. So I get a constant mix that way, and they often refer to other writers. So Eric Bailey's a very good example. He writes terrific articles himself, and he'll say, I was reading a really interesting article by this guy. And so I'll follow the link to that guy and go, right, well, I'm going to follow that guy from now on. And that kind of, constantly builds up. At some point, it's going to explode. My feed reader is just going to say, no, you can't have any more links. But at the moment, it's, I just keep expanding and expanding and expanding. And I find that as digital accessibility in particular, and I say that specifically because I know that, for instance, Jack focuses on accessibility in general, not just digital accessibility. And that also becomes an interesting source for me because some of the articles that he puts links to focus on physical accessibility, And I'll go through and I'll have a look at them. And you go, there's something of interest here to people who work in digital accessibility. So that's another way. And then there are people like Laura Carlson who cover areas that I don't cover. So a lot more of what's happening in higher education, research papers, that kind of stuff. So I feel like the well is not going to run dry anytime soon. There's a ton of sources out there. And I don't feel like I struggle to keep up because I have enough content. People don't want to read more than about 60 items. In fact, I'm sure that nobody reads all 60 items every week. It's a case of just following my nose most of the time.
No, that's completely fair. Jack, you mentioned earlier AI and how it's complicating all these things. And, the simple question, is AI friend or foe, is quite a gray question because, well, it depends, which is my favorite answer. Because AI is so dominating right now in the news cycle, how are you finding this, the impact that it's having on accessibility news?
Well, I have put in a news section in the newsletter that covers AI legal because, again, I'm going to always gravitate to legal. And the reason I follow it so closely is there's been states all across the country that have had software laws on if you XYZ company buy a piece of software that somehow, some way discriminates against people in the hiring process, then you XYZ company are on the hook too from a lawsuit perspective. So there's a pass through on the law in the lawsuit. And so AI's going down that same road. And so every state is drafting some of them have drafted they're into their second version of their AI law, so specifically like Colorado and California. In the United States, they were talking about having an umbrella AI law. Well, that never really took off. So the states took it upon themselves to really aggressively go after it. And so because AI is built off of patterns and they're patterns of information that are taken from websites all over the world, and those patterns that they see start to paint a picture of whatever. It could be medicine, it could be accessibility, it could be types of people to hire. And so there's inherently the possibility of discrimination for disabled people, for minorities, and any number of other ways that AI can possibly discriminate. And so that's playing out in the news, and it's only going to blow. It's going to blow up. I'd say it's blown up to a degree, but having been at the forefront of a lot of different legal proceedings over the course of decades now, and watching lawsuits to start to proliferate like they did during COVID. Everybody and their brother was suing everybody for different things during COVID. The same thing's happening with AI. And I've suggested to members of my family who are considering going to law school, I said specialize in AI law because it's going to be an area that gets a lot of focus. And I mentioned Workday, not to pick on them, but they're in the news and it's getting a lot of focus. And there's a class action activity going on there. And I think that's what we as professionals need to be aware of in our industry, from an accessibility standpoint. What is the AI fix actually going to do for a disabled person? Is it actually going to help them? It's kind of like overlays. Who's it really help? And I think it's too soon to tell, but I think that's why I wanted to start tracking it, at least get it on people's radar as to what things they should be paying attention to from a legal perspective. Because we all know people with disabilities get discriminated against. And AI is another layer of discrimination that has been bolted on now. And we have to, as practitioners in the industry, have an understanding of that and make sure we have that question. What does this do for disabled people? How do you ensure that it doesn't discriminate against them? And I just think that's really, really important. For any advancements we've made, we can take a few steps back because AI is that shiny penny that everybody wants to pick up, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good solution or a good legal solution in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. DK, AI is obviously dominating tech news. It's just part of everyday news now. Not just from the legal sense, but just, the quote unquote innovations that are coming out of it. Do you find that it's starting to like come up more and more in articles that are being sent to you that you're finding that are being included in your newsletter?
Yes, it definitely has come up more. Um, you know, I really agree with Jack that I'm taking the same kind of perspective. Before I worked in tech, I worked as a journalist. So I tend to bring a curious but skeptical mindset to most things, and that's how I approach AI. It can be, I'm curious because, hey, maybe this can be useful, but also skeptical because, if someone's telling me it's going to solve all the problems, I tend to not believe that. So I really put that lens through, I use that lens when I'm looking at, links. And I use the lens of like, I try to play a balance. If I know that last week I had a bit of an AI optimist type link in there or two, like I try to balance it out with a few more that are more pessimistic. But I think that much like social media, right? Like there are some benefits to social media in terms of, people being able to connect in different ways, but also there were a lot of downsides to social media. People getting addicted and uh, things like that. So I think AI will probably land in that area as well. Like most technologies, like it's going to be some good, it's going to be some bad, and we have to parse it out. And I think Jack is correct that parsing it through the lens of like, is this going to actually help people with disabilities or is it going to keep the discrimination happening? It's a good lens to keep the focus on.
So I wonder, in fact, Ricky, this one's for you, because cautionary approach, absolutely. AI could be helpful too, dot, dot, dot. We could make up 100 scenarios. Ricky, could it be helpful for you in helping to filter through your several hundreds of RSS feeds to help you curate your content every week? Is there a place? So there's a place for AI, no doubt, because the reality is it's there. Is there a place for it in accessibility news?
Um, well, I think I could use AI to help me curate newsletter, but it would A, take all the fun out of it for me, and B, I don't think it would make nearly as good a set of selections as I do because I base it on my expertise, my experience, what I think my audience wants to see. And I don't think AI is up to that set of skills, quite frankly. It's an interesting topic for me because my main day job is writing training courses, right? That are both for our clients and for our accessibility engineers. I wrote a training course that was on the implications of AI for digital accessibility, right? And as I often do, I turned that into a blog post. It had to go into two blog posts, part one and part two. That ended up sparking some online discussions. So some people who run webinars and podcasts started talking about the article, and some agreed with it, some didn't. My most recent task has been I started out trying to write a training course on how digital practitioners can use AI in a practical way right now. That ended up, I had to split it into three parts because it just became too big. So one part focused on designers and developers, one part focused on authors and auditors, and one part focused on general digital practitioners. And that involved me using a lot of AI. So I'd go into VS Code, where I do a lot of my work on GitHub. I do it with an IDE, an editor called VS Code, and I can install AI agents like Claude and Gemini and Codex in there to help me do that work. And so I was able to test it out. On an accessibility level, they're terrible. They just don't refer to accessibility unless they are very, very specifically prompted. And at the moment, it's the case that if you ask something like ChatGPT, what's the best way to make this accessible? They'll say, use ARIA. And if you then ask, what's the best way to use semantic HTML to make this accessible? Then they'll come back, oh, is that what you wanted to know? Oh, yeah, sure. Semantic HTML is always better. Right? Yeah. So a lot goes into how you phrase the questions as to what the answers that you'll get. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the data sets they currently work on not only don't refer very well to accessibility, they don't know what accessibility or even disability is. You know, when you're using things like voice-based AI, voice chat that is AI-powered, you'd better not have a funny accent or a speech defect because it can't understand you. You know? And of course, it won't say that it can't understand you. It'll just make up responses, which is just absurd. You know? So I think a lot of those tools were released way too early, before they had been refined in terms of the data sets, the large language models that they use, and how they interact with people. Having said that, I also see some things like generative UI, which is where you let an agent, an AI agent, pretty much take over your browser and shape your online experience to your specific needs and your personal history. So if you've got to book a trip to Melbourne, it'll say you're in a wheelchair, so you're going to need wheelchair access on an airline. And it'll automatically take that into account when it's presenting you with the booking options. That has enormous potential for people with disabilities. And it's, you know, it is a new frontier in those regards. I also think the other thing to note is that AI isn't itself new. It's been around since the 1940s, you know, and it's significant that things like Google Translate switched to using AI in 2016 and nobody noticed. The only thing you noticed is it got 80% better at doing the translations. And no one thinks of Google Translate as being AI. It's just Google Translate. And I think as AI settles in, that's going to be the case. Once we stop talking about it as AI and it's just something that works in the background, it will become really useful. But the big risk at the moment is that it's not ready and people are using it as an autonomous agent that acts under its own authority. That is really scary, and that is absolutely dangerous for people with disabilities.
Absolutely. I think, I can't remember who I heard say it recently, but they said if you can get AI to do the heavy lifting, it's actually the human work that's more important, and you can focus on the really good stuff afterwards. But that means you have to have the knowledge to begin with, not rely on AI to have the knowledge.
Well, that's the only way you can use it at the moment. If you can come back to AI and say, no, actually, you're wrong. I have more expertise in this field than you do, and you are wrong. That's the only safe way to use it at the moment.
The fascinating thing about that, I guess, is always that people forget that AI is only as good as the information it has, and it doesn't necessarily have great information unless you feed it really good information first, which goes to the prompting as well. Your prompts have to be really good to get a really good answer, or else it'll default to who knows what. I knew if I asked about AI. Yeah, please.
Can I add one thing? One area that we, as an industry, we're not focusing on this yet, but in the medical industry, which disabled people obviously have to participate in with their various doctors, and the aging baby boomers are going to be seeing doctors more often. The use of AI in medicine is something that it needs to be policed really closely from a patient standpoint. And the AMA just recently did an article specifically on AI, and really the gist of it was that AI doesn't know how to say, "I don't know," and that's a problem in medicine. If it's not admitting it doesn't know something, And the other challenge is there's a big group of AI companies in telemedicine now, and there's conflicting information that's coming out of the AI that a patient's primary care physician is saying something differently. And so then you have to ask the question, okay, is it AI actually safe for me to use when it comes to my health? And should I rely on it very often? And who should be the go-to answer on a medical solution? So, and again, I bring that up from the disabled community standpoint. We as potential patients need to really have an understanding of how AI is being used in a doctor's office or in a hospital, because it is being used. And private equity's into that industry quite extensively, and they're using it because they see ways of cutting costs and making an organization more efficient. But that doesn't mean it's good for the patient, and it doesn't mean it's good for a disabled person. So that's more of a heads up for all of us, because it's super important.
Great reminder. Also a reminder to remind my mother-in-law not to trust Dr. Google. Ricky?
I just wanted to add there that the example I always give is if you ask generative AI, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, what's somebody's birthday, and it doesn't know, it will pick a date because it has a 1 in 365 chance of being right. And if it doesn't say, and says it doesn't know the answer, then it's got a 0 chance in 365 of being right. And it will always go towards the chance that it is right.
Interesting. I did
Yeah.
I
not
would not
know
want to
that.
apply that logic to medicine or
No.
accessibility.
Yeah.
Ought to legal. That
Yeah.
judges have kicked out briefs all over the country saying, this was written by AI. Sorry, you're not submitting that in my courthouse.
That's really fascinating. I know AI it's such a broad topic, and there's so many places we could go with it. Outside of AI, which is obviously a huge topic in tech news, but just in the news in general, obviously. Um, what is, and Jack, you're biggest on my screen right now, so you're going to get it first. Jack, what is the biggest piece of news in the last 6 months that you've shared with your reader list that stuck with you?
I mentioned it earlier. The DOJ Title II shifting of the dates out a year after they had given everybody 2 years to comply. And then the same with HHS shifting it out a year. I think what someone, the average person in the world doesn't even know what accessibility means. But if you're disabled, you know exactly what it means. And I make this comparison a lot. If the unemployment rate is 3.2%, but one of us or all of us are unemployed, then our unemployment rate is 100%. And so if you're disabled, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. There might be 1 in 4 in the world, but for you, it's 1-to-1. And so when a law like this gets pushed off a year, that means you have to wait another year to get the equal rights that people who don't have a disability have, and to be able to access things on a regular basis that other people can do without even thinking about it because they know nothing about accessibility. So those two shifts in dates might seem trivial to the average person, but for the disabled community, it's huge. It's a gut punch. And I felt it, I heard it, I saw it, and I covered it a lot. And I'll keep on covering it until this thing actually takes place next year in April. But it was truly disappointing and hurtful. And you can't have empathy and understand this unless you've either been disabled or you've had someone in your sphere of influence who's been disabled or is disabled, and to know what this impact is on a digital basis. It's huge. It's really, and it was extremely disappointing that the federal government did this.
I'm curious both in yours and David's response, particularly around Title II, because I think we certainly, everyone in the industry felt it, and it did. It felt like a gut punch. There was certainly from a company point of view, I remember sort of the panic in the lead up before they extended of companies coming to us like, oh no, as if they didn't know this was about to happen. Um, oh no, we didn't do this thing and now we have, a month and a half. And lucky for them, it got extended, frankly. It's kind of the way they viewed those sorts of things. On the ground, DK, I'm going to go to you. Is on the ground, did you feel that as well, that there was a panic in the lead up and then, you know, un almost this unfortunate sigh of relief from companies who hadn't done the right thing in the lead up to Title II, the deadline?
Yeah, I think certainly, um, you know, that was a big piece of news, and I cover that a bit through again stealing from Jack and Ricky's stuff. Um, at least in the realm, one of the pieces we were looking at least on the government contracting side, is some of that stuff would trickle down more to states, right?
Mm.
Um, um, and seeing that pushed off, I think, might mean states can duck some things here and there. Um, so yeah, I think that's true. Um, I see that to go back to your other question around the bigger piece of news,
Mm.
like, and I'll cheat here and because it is AI related, but I remember just seeing a ton about and I'm a designer, so like this is probably my own bias here, but when Figma released Figma Make, Figma
Mm.
is a popular design tool. Figma Make was their kind of take on a generative AI tool that can produce code. And of course, what do accessibility people do? Like they started testing it, and it was like really rough and bad, and there was a like quite a quite a few articles about like just how bad it was, and that really stuck with me. And it I don't know, it's a good sort of I don't know the metaphor here, but like it's a good like small vignette to like the tech hype cycle, at least here in the States when it comes to AI. Like we get the hype, we hear how good it is, but in reality, those of us who are on the ground doing the work in the trenches every day know that it's not exactly true. So that really stuck with me because it it mirrors a lot of what I've seen so far.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I as a consultant and someone who leads our WCAG auditing team, I look at an awful lot of Figma designs in the lead up to any sort of audit, and yes, I can concur that there were some broken pieces to that for sure. Ricky, your biggest piece of news, not AI related or maybe sub related. We'll give you the DK exception as well.
Well, I would probably nominate what's happening in Europe with EN, uh, the technical standard 304549, because there are a number of aspects to it that are proving to be quite problematic. And yet it is being adopted by a lot of countries like Australia around the world. And they don't really know how they're going to enforce it. And they don't really even understand it. And like we've been trying to expand the auditing tool that we have at Vispero, the ARC platform, so that you can choose which standard you want to audit against, Section 508, WCAG 2.2, or a different level of it, or EN 301549. EN 301549 is really hard, and it extends so far beyond what WCAG does, and it
Mm.
has the implications for cost to infrastructure is so huge that people are just going, okay, this is going to take a long time to put in place. And at the moment, each country is expected to come up with their in the European Union is expected to come up with their own enforcement agency for it. And the few sections that have made any kind of impact in a legal sense, like in France, there was a case, it got thrown out of court because technically they didn't have to comply according to the wording of EN 301549. And there's going to be an awful lot of that happening. I think as a technical standard, it's going to become part of what will be WCAG 3, and that is going to be difficult at the very least. So I think that's something that is going to have enormous implications that we haven't fully realized yet.
Yeah, I think, and WCAG 3 is a different topic for a different day, but I think that is one of the complications and potential problems with what's coming is the broadness of it will make it difficult from a legal perspective. So we're now seeing sort of this shift in Australia. Even without an Accessibility Act, there are now various maturity directives at federal level for being proactive against discrimination rather than reactive. So this is a change that we're only seeing now in Australia since January 1st, where it's health, finance, and I think government are the three industries that need to be preemptive and proactive rather than reactive to discrimination when it comes under the Disability Discrimination Act, which is very new. I can't believe in 2026 this is the first time we've said to industries like the health industry, by the way, you need to not be reactive to disability discrimination. But it is a shift in not just in culture, but it's a shift in all of the infrastructure, both physical and digital, because then we talk about the shift left approach, but shift left helps when you're starting something new, not when you have an enormous architecture of information with using all sorts of different vendors and technology and tools. So it's a very big beast. It's a very big beast. And what we want to avoid, especially with things like 301549, is that everything just goes in the too hard basket. And this is probably my worry with WCAG 3 too, between you, me, and the 30 odd people in this room, is probably my worry too, and everything ends up in the too hard basket, or on the other end where it's there's no bite to it. So we also don't want that. If there's no bite, then no one's going to do it. The surge that we saw in people reaching out to accessibility companies, Ricky, like yours, like mine, and other companies in North America in particular around Title II was because there was going to be some bite to the accessibility laws. So you need that balance of stick and carrot, I guess, for lack of a better term. We've got about 15 minutes, so I want to give each of you like a good 5 minutes for the next one, because I think it's not a difficult question, don't worry. But it's kind of a two-part question. We've kind of talked about your challenges of doing, like, distributing news in the way that you do it with your newsletters and your links. But the most rewarding part, what are you coming away with at the end of the day? So whether that's the 22 hours that Jack is putting in or the 2.5, Ricky, that you're putting in, what's the most rewarding part about being that person that people go to for news? So maybe DK, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that is an easy one. So I don't track any analytics or anything on my newsletter. I used to when it first started. That certainly helped me get sponsors. But my metrics of success for the newsletter is if I can put out a call for some testimonials and people respond, that's success. If I get, I get the occasional email that says, "Hey, I have been subscribed to your newsletter for a year or two, and I have learned so much." Boom. That's the job. That's why I started it. And like, I'll be honest and say like, there have been multiple times over the years where I'm like, "Oh, I should maybe stop this. This is like taking up too much of my free time." But then I get one of those emails, and I'm like, "Okay, fine, I'll keep going." So that's what makes it rewarding is that, people are learning and they're getting better. That's what I want to see.
I love that. Jack, the most rewarding thing about curating your newsletter?
Mine's along the same vein as David. I get a pretty regular flow of subscriber feedback. And, I'll typically get it on a Friday because I send it on a Thursday. And Friday, by the time I'm reading it, I might have gotten 3 or 4 hours of sleep by the time I went to bed. And they're very uplifting. And it's to the degree of, you've really had an impact on the way we approach things at our organization. I mean, it could be a school, it could be a corporation. But I think some of the people that I've met and the things that they're doing is just awe-inspiring. There's an organization in Africa, Tambua Utu Foundation, which was really founded to help albino children who were being sold by their parents and basically killed for the special powers of their skin and their bones and their teeth. And Helen Mushi, who's responsible for starting the organization, her sole goal was to bring these children in to help them. And then what ultimately happened is Helen started to bring in disabled children and to help them. And, so she has a heart of gold, truly a heart of gold. And I met her because she was a subscriber, and I reached out to her when she subscribed. And the work that she does it's God's work. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And so she does fundraising where people contribute $150, which will buy a wheelchair and give a child a whole new life, meaning they can get around their village, they can go to school, they can be with their friends on the soccer field or whatever it may be. So, I've been in the corporate world my entire career, and I've worked for nonprofits and privately held and publicly traded companies. And this is by far the most rewarding work I've ever done. And yeah, Microsys is a for-profit company. I look at myself as a nonprofit. I accept no money. I accept no sponsors. I do no tracking. That's not the purpose. I go back to a good friend of mine who was a priest in Boston who's now retired, Dr. Allen. I mean, doctor. He was a doctor. He was a psychologist on top of it. But I asked him one time on sermons. I said, how many people do you think you impact every week? And he goes, doesn't matter. He said, if it's just one person in the church who leaves with a new outlook on life and maybe one step further away from committing suicide or one step further away from, getting a divorce or handling a problem. And that was great insight way back when I was in my 20s. That's the way I look at it. If one subscriber every week gets one thing that's impactful to their job, to their family, to their village in South Africa. That's why I spend 22 hours a week. It's a labor of love. It educates me. It gives me the ability to connect with people at a level that you just don't have the ability to connect with. Everybody's on their cell phones now. You go to an airport and you sit in a terminal and no one even looks at you. But this is a way to communicate with people over the internet and on Zoom calls and to share similar views and outlooks and visions of what we can do for the world.
I love that. That's a beautiful answer. Ricky, good luck winding that bag. Ricky, your most rewarding.
My answer is much more mundane than that. I guess there's two answers really. One is about the weekly reading list. And that is my measure of success of that is the number of people who share it on social media. So I post it on basically every form of social media that I can. And it's very heartening to see people who are regarded as subject matter experts in the industry sharing that to their readers and their followers because they regard it as a source of truth. It's worth reading. And that brings great value to me. I also get quite a bit of feedback from people who just email me to say, that's fantastic. I had no idea there was this much going on, which is terrific as well. I also do the monthly newsletter for OZeWAI, which is a different kettle of fish entirely because it's focused on subscribers and members, building a sense of community within the community-based organization, sharing information that I think our members and subscribers should know. And on a weekly basis, we get new subscribers. And they are people who are not necessarily focused on digital accessibility, but they want to know what OZeWAI is about and how that is growing as a professional association in Australia. That's incredibly gratifying. And I get direct emails from people as well saying, this is fantastic. I had no idea there was this much going on in Australia. So they're two different animals, but really they are. I don't get nearly as much feedback from sending them out as I might like, but the feedback that I do get, I trust is accurate and it's enough to keep me going.
I think what's really beautiful about all of this is that I think at surface level, what you're all doing is keeping us informed around the world globally, obviously, with such a global panel. But deeper than that is the connection that you make to community, the three of you. You're making connections between communities across a really broad spectrum. And I find, and ultimately, and Jackie spoke much more eloquently than I will, but you're making the world a better place by sharing this news, by getting voices out there, voices that might not be heard otherwise. I think what was so fascinating when when Bea first asked me to moderate this panel, and I was thinking of, what questions am I going to come with? Well, what do you ask about accessibility news? And then we're all trying to do our bit. And the news that you're sharing, those voices that you are helping to get out, those voices might not be heard otherwise, or at least not to as broad an audience. So it becomes a really important thing what you're doing for the industry, for people with disabilities who ultimately benefit from this news being shared. So it's really beautiful, and I can't thank the three of you enough for all the hard work that you put in, regardless of the hours, just the care that you take in taking time to do this and sharing beyond just our industry. With that,
and Amanda,
yeah.
one thing, I mean, disabilities is very personal, as we all know, and anybody who has either been disabled, temporarily or is disabled. And I always look at it as the disabled community all over the world needs a voice, like Helen in South Africa and us here in the United States and you guys in Australia. And the number that I keep on hopping on, and I'll hop on until the day I stop doing the newsletter, is the number of people who are in the boomer group of 62 to 80 years old, and the number of that group that are becoming that new wave of disabled people that aren't captured in any numbers. They're not captured in the World Health Organization numbers of 1.3 billion. It's a significant number. It's growing. And, I see it because I'm in the boomer group and I talk to family and friends regularly. And it's kind of depressing. I'm in the accessibility industry, but it's kind of depressing hearing the different things that people are experiencing. People going blind, people getting cancer, people having strokes, people having to use a wheelchair and maybe even permanently, people having spine issues. This is real. This is personal. And so that's what drives me more than anything is we've got this huge group of a population that we've known about for a long time that is aging in front of us and have for years been able to use digital perfectly fine, but now they're blind in one eye or they're deaf in one ear, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's this accessibility stuff on my iPhone? They're starting to pay attention to stuff they never needed to, and their family members are looking for solutions. So that's an audience, kind of, if you look at a blue ocean of any industry, the blue ocean is the boomers and the needs that they have, and they don't know that they have them yet, or maybe they do, and we as an industry need to be focusing on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an aging population, and we are living longer. So that is
Much.
going to continue to trend as well, which is really important. I know as someone who is the tech person somehow, even with my Gen X husband, I am the tech person in our family, and the patience that we have to show that generation before us to walk them through, yes, you can, my mother-in-law, I can read her text messages from the next room. They're so big. And then, by the way, Mom, did you know that's an accessibility feature? Oh, I don't have a disability, she says. And you're like, well, the fact that I can read your text messages from the next room says otherwise. You have a barrier that technology can help break. We just have to code things properly and design them well. I think that brings us to time. I know Bree will have some outgoing messages, but personally from me, Ricky, DK, Jack, thank you so much. What a fantastic session. I had no idea if we could go an hour and a half about news, but I could easily go a lot longer. So thank you so much for your time and for everything that you do. It makes a difference.
You're welcome, and thank you for your great questions.
Yeah, it was a great session.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. Wonderfully moderated too, Amanda. You got everything out of there, including all this wonderful emotion about why we are in this field as well. Really appreciate it. Yeah, great session. Keep an eye out on your response in your Humanitics to actually check the recording or share the recording with others. If you haven't already, and thank you for the one person, if there's someone's already joined, thank you so much. Well done. But yes, I'll put the join link in again. And also, if you haven't already, register for or subscribe to our Humanitics to actually see the next couple of sessions coming up, or subscribe to our newsletter. Ricky always has them in there as well, which we're really appreciative of. And look, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I will stop the recording now. And if you can, share the news a bit wider. Thanks all.